Jacques' books are incredibly dense and detailed, not for the faint of heart. But if you read them closely, Jacques can drop some truth bombs you won't get anywhere else, like in his book Revelations, Alien Contact and Human Deception, when he hints that Bob Lazar was actually an MK-Ultra patient, possibly the subject of government brainwashing, which led him to believe he worked on reverse engineering UFOs. On page 9, Vallée writes, Robert Lazar also told me of his strange memory lapses of the peculiar liquid he was made to drink.
It violated a lot of what we thought was impossible to violate.
I want to start with Trinity, the book, and then we can kind of expand out from there. It's a fascinating topic that I think kind of updates our modern understanding of ufology, because we think about Roswell as a sort of basic starting point. And in fact, at Trinity test site in New Mexico, there was a test on July of 1945, and then 20 days later in San Antonio, you see this crash. Trinity is a fascinating story. Just 20 days after the first atomic test on US soil, and 2 days after the Japanese concession, a metallic avocado-shaped object dropped from the sky in San Antonio, New Mexico, right next to the test site.
It is damaged. It has lost one panel, but it kept its integrity.
Two kids, the sons of local cattle ranchers Remy Baca and Jose Padilla, ages 7 and 9 respectively, saw the craft in the distance.
Through that opening of one panel that's missing, they see three creatures. They were human-like. They had two eyes. They were, about 3 feet. They had 2 arms, 3 fingers, and 2 legs. They were walking by, moving like that without moving their legs.
They were sliding.
Translate or slide.
Yeah.
Remy was crying. Remy's was 7-year-old. He says, look, you go there if you want to. No way, I'm going into that thing.
But why would Jacques, at the age of 83, write just another UFO crash story? Because this isn't just a Roswell redux. The Trinity story has unique, profound implications on ufology for 3 major reasons. Number 1, it occurred before the word flying saucer was in our public lexicon.
It's not a flying saucer. The term flying saucer doesn't exist. It's going to be invented 2 years later by Kenneth Arnold.
This shows that the UFO story, even in the American context, likely precedes Roswell, which also happened in 1947, 2 years after Trinity. And that flying saucers are just the modern version of something that has been going on for millennia. This is a point Jacques repeatedly makes in many of his books.
People have always seen aliens. When I wrote Passport to Magonia, people said, Vallée has gone off the deep end. That's what I want to engraved on my grave, Vallée has gone off the deep end.
Number 2, when Jacques inquired about Trinity, no one with top secret clearances in the US federal government had even heard of the case. In fact, Vallée was introduced to it by an Italian UFO researcher named Paola Harris, who later became his co-author on the book.
And she had already interviewed and had tapes of interviews with both of the kids, who by then were old men.
In Jacques' mind, this complete obliviousness on the part of the federal government shows that the group that holds the secrets to the UFO story is a small insular one with their own separate set of clearances.
One big question that Paola and I have had is, would Oppenheimer have been told? The Manhattan Project would have custody of it, and then it would go into the Atomic Energy Commission, and then it would go into the Department of Energy, which has its own line of clearances. And that's why I can't find among the people I know who have clearances above top secret, they've never heard of this.
Yeah.
They've never heard of this because you can be in the Pentagon with a top secret clearance, but if you're not briefed on the atomic secrets, you wouldn't get the clearances that you needed to do to open up that thing.
In fact, Chris Mellon, the former Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defense for Intelligence in the Clinton and George W. Bush administrations, claims he almost met with someone from the UFO program.
I was supposed to meet a fellow, for example, who supposedly was in one of these aerospace companies and supposedly had been directly involved in that activity. And we were about 2 weeks away from meeting when he died, when he had a heart attack.
To add more evidence to this theory that UFOs are in commercial hands, subject to a completely separate clearance system, is the notorious Wilson Memo, a leaked document describing a secret meeting occurring between the Director of Intelligence J2, Admiral Thomas Wilson, and a physicist and propulsion expert named Eric Davis. In this alleged meeting, the Admiral expresses complete exasperation as he uncovers and meets with a black-budget private aerospace corporation attempting to reverse engineer crashed UFOs without any official government oversight. Wilson says that the gatekeepers of this program are convinced that the material in their possession are not of this earth, but that the process of doing anything productive with the material has been slow and cumbersome, with little to no success since Roswell. They also describe a system of intense compartmentalization, so no one in the program besides those at the top have the full picture.
No one has the whole puzzle or an image of the whole puzzle, but they have pieces, they have corners of the puzzle.
The whole thing was set up to be that way, on purpose.
And number 3, Trinity is a perfect example of the inherently absurd nature of UFOs. It is a bizarre yet cinematic story that is so hard to figure out, but has had a profound impact on the witnesses involved.
It's absurd. I mean, think of the Zen coin, you know, the sound of one hand clapping. Well, where's the other hand, you know? So, you know, it stops your brain. The behavior in close encounters is not take me to your leader. It's not this is what you guys should do from now on, because that's not going to work. There was one case in good old San Jose. A woman had seen something over her house. It was a big disc. And I say, how big was it? And she says, well, it was about the same size as her house. It was, you know, just like that. And I say, well, when you went inside, you said, you know, there was this being, and the being took you on a staircase. I say, where did the staircase go? Well, the staircase went up the side of this big round room. I say, how would you compare it to? It's, well, like a movie house, you know, like an amphitheater. I said, that's bigger than your house. Why is the inside bigger than the outside?
Like if it exists outside of 4D, you know, time, space, or whatever. Say this is, you know, you have a 2D universe and this is a 3D object. If it intersects, you're just going to see a sliver of it. So you'll just see a disc.
Yes.
Edwin Abbott wrote about a 3D society interacting with a 2D plane in his late 19th century classic, Flatland. On Earth, we have the ability to move above and below sea level, east-west, and north-south. So we have 3 degrees of motion, or axes on which we can move. Say you're a fly in a box. You can move up and down, forwards and backwards, and right and left. But say that box is part of a larger hypercube, and the box part is the only part of the hypercube intersecting with our 3D plane. The hypercube would obviously be much bigger on the inside than what's represented on the outside intersecting with our visible reality. Instead of describing this phenomena myself to you, this clip from the great Carl Sagan says it all.
This cube casts a shadow. That shadow we recognize as 2 squares with their vertices connected. Now, let's take this 3-dimensional cube and project it, carry it through a 4th physical dimension. In that case, we would generate a 4-dimensional hypercube, which is also called a tesseract. I cannot show you a tesseract because I and you are trapped in 3 dimensions. But what I can show you is the shadow in 3 dimensions of a 4-dimensional hypercube or tesseract. This is it. And you can see it's 2 nested cubes, all the vertices connected by lines. And now the real tesseract in 4 dimensions would have all the lines of equal length and all the angles right angles. That's not what we see here, but that's the penalty of projection. So you see, while we cannot imagine the world of 4 dimensions, we can certainly think about it perfectly well.
Do you think people, you know, we were just talking about Jeffrey Mishlove, who just interviewed you. He wrote about a guy named Mr. PK, Ted Owens, and Ted Owens claimed to be a almost a biological sensor of UFOs. And there are people, I think Chris Bledsoe in North Carolina, there are a couple of other people who sort of claim similar things. And so is there something about the human body and its energy capacity that allows perception in some cases and denies it in other cases, when maybe we're actually swimming in these things and we just don't sort of perceive them in our normal reality?
That's something that Dr. Hynek was worried about. He was very bothered by people who would see, so you'd see a UFO, you report it, okay. You see another one, okay. There are people who've been hit by lightning twice. There are people who win the lottery twice, or 3 times. But then there are people who see them all the time, like you say. They never know exactly when, but boom, there's a UFO in the sky. We have people like that on the ranch, in Utah. People have described people who were, trained Army officers who went to the ranch a few days, went home, and boom, there was some phenomenon following them. And, the entity may play with your life. I don't know, it can be there.
Is it good or bad? Because, I think of the hierophanies that Diana Pasulka writes about, where somebody can have a beautiful religious conversion experience that seems positive, and then in other cases they feel like kind of demonic tricksters giving you false information. So,
from what I've read, people perceive it as bad. They want to be rid of it, and we certainly hear that from current witnesses who had no idea that this was possibly going to happen. They are bothered by things in their home, including things that cause trouble.